Desi Boys with a Z, because nobody spells it with an S anymore. It's 11 minutes past 7 on Sunday evening. It's BBC Three Counties Radio. If you've just joined me, welcome along. It's Yasmeen Khan. Now, over the last week, people across the UK have been raising awareness for Sexual Health Week. When Shamal Waraich contracted HIV in 2013, the course of his life changed forever. He left his job and now works with newly diagnosed people. And Shamal joins me in the studio. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
Can I ask you to take me back to the day that you were diagnosed?
So reliving it now, it was a very difficult time. I think that for me, as a British, Asian, gay, Muslim person, to be diagnosed with HIV kind of really changed my perspective in life. And I thought, this is it. This is a death sentence, and this is the beginning of the end. But over time, with a lot of support from organisations and engaging with people and learning and doing my research and working closely with the hospital and with my doctors, I've come through the other side and now I'm a survivor.
And we'll talk about the work that you're doing, but excuse me, can I ask you what it was like before that? Because you just reeled off, as we often do, all the identifiers. So, British, Muslim, gay, now living with HIV. What was it like for you before that? Was it, before the diagnosis, was it problematic for you to be out? Were your family and friends okay with it?
So my family and friends have been really good. My family are very, very supportive. They've always been very supportive. They allowed me to go to fashion college. From the beginning, they were always very supportive of me. I'd been with my partner for about 6 years at that point. And they were supportive of him, and I'd come out to them. So they were supportive even of my sexuality.
Well, it's refreshing, because often I will talk to people on this programme and sadly they've had completely the opposite experience. So it's great to hear that was...
I'm blessed. I'm very, very lucky. I'm fully aware that in the Asian community, a lot of children, a lot of kids do get ostracised because of their sexuality or their identity.
Do you think it's changing?
Definitely so. I think now there's a little bit more of a shift in attitudes. People are becoming a little bit more understanding to the different kind of varieties of people and backgrounds that they come for, whether it's their sexuality, whether it's exploring their gender identity. People are beginning to learn that and I think there's a lot more media coverage, there's a lot more people and a lot more representation as well, which kind of really helps.
So when you were diagnosed, did that sort of goodwill as you had and that acceptance stay in place, or did things change a bit?
So I really struggled with that. I think it came from a lot of cultural and stigma, from self-stigma. I just really struggled with the idea of becoming HIV or accepting that I was HIV positive. And I really struggled with my diagnosis. I didn't really know how to kind of handle it, how to deal with it, and kind of retreated a lot. And I just almost kind of buried my head in the sand because I didn't know what it meant, how to deal with it, and what the future lay, basically. And
it's interesting that you almost sound like you were judging yourself, never mind what anyone else thought.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of self-stigma, I think, as being from an Asian Muslim background as well. We kind of judge a lot of things that we do, associate them with sins, or, this is good and that's bad. And I think there was just a lot of self-stigma and a lot of almost anger and hatred in myself, kind of going, this is something that I either deserve or this is something that was meant to happen, and it kind of, paving the way for my sins, basically.
Was the diagnosis a surprise to you?
At the time it was, yeah. I went in for a routine checkup, and it was a surprise. I didn't think it was going to come back HIV positive. But in that moment, I was so ashamed and so guilty, I think, and that comes from that Asian culture and that background.
But why did it sort of rear then? Because presumably you were comfortable. You talked about your family were okay with it. I don't know how long it took you to come out to your family and friends. Was it a long time?
So quite a long time. So I'd been at university and I'd been with my partner for about 5 years. So it was a struggle, regardless to my parents being supportive. No one wants to be rejected, and I was fully aware that rejection could come, that ostracization could come.
But it didn't. It didn't. And then you get to a point where you get your diagnosis, and at that point, as you say, there's sort of an anger, a self-loathing almost. Why do you think that happened? Why was it shameful for you?
I didn't really understand what HIV was. I think I had that image and that idea that it's a death sentence, the tombstones from the 80s. It's something that's going to, debilitate my body, physically and mentally. So I just wasn't really prepared for it. And I think when you haven't accepted it yourself or you haven't owned it, it's really hard to kind of take that step forward and kind of tell people about it and be open about it. So I didn't want to accept it. So for a long time, I just kind of shut down and didn't even think about it other than go to my clinic and kind of engage with that and get support there. I didn't tell anyone for a long while.
Really isolating.
It was very, very, I think that self-stigma really makes it quite isolating. I think now I work with newly diagnosed people who are living with HIV and just been newly diagnosed, and there's a common theme of isolation there. It is quite isolating when you don't quite understand what the virus means or what it means to be living with HIV.
And you just said, you painted an image which so many people will be familiar with, the tombstones from the adverts in the mid-80s, and that it spelled the end of your life.
Absolutely. I mean, now the medication is so fantastic. Somebody who's on medication and on treatment can live a near normal life and expect a near normal life. So I've learned that through the work that I've done and through the activities that I've done and the support that I've got. But at the time, I just thought, this is it. This is the end.
So when you started going to the clinic, reading up a bit more, presumably you got to a point where you felt a bit more comfortable and then were able to tell people.
Yeah, I was quite lucky. I had a really great hospital, really great doctor, and really good support network around me, and they almost empowered me to learn more about how to live with the virus and how to own it, so that I wouldn't be worried about those ideas of the tombstones and death around it, and actually realizing that it's something that will just normalize once I start my treatment and get into the swing of things.
And when you did tell people, what response did you get?
So I started very, very slowly. The first person I wanted to tell was my partner, and then I told a few select friends. Almost all of them have been really, really supportive, and anyone else.
So it took you a while before you told your partner?
Yeah, I did. Was
that a bit of a battle for you?
Yeah, it was the isolating thing. I didn't know what his reaction was going to be. I didn't know what my friends' reactions were going to be. I was in fear of that rejection. I didn't want to be rejected because of this. I was quite worried about what it all meant. So it took me quite a while to come out to certain people, especially even starting with my partner, then friends, and then family. But the support has been fantastic. Everybody has been very, very supportive.
And you're in a good place now, but I can understand the kind of delay that you put in, because you were battling with it yourself. Do you think part of that is because there was, and I don't know how much it's changed, that there was this narrative of, if gay men get it, it's their own fault, and all that kind of, when people didn't know so much about the disease, that kind of thing would be said? Absolutely.
I think there still is to a certain extent, and I think in particular communities, the gay white community, I'll be quite frank, is very accustomed to learning about it, and there's a lot of support available and a lot of resources around it, and it's kind of always there in the back of people's minds. But when you go out of those communities, the ones that it can affect the most, there's no knowledge and there's no understanding of it, and I think that's where all that fear comes from, and that's where we kind of need to abolish it. So that's one of the reasons why I'm kind of sharing my story, so that I can kind of dispel some of those myths.
I've got to admit, you're someone, as I said, I've had people on the show from various South Asian communities, and it's still only a limited number of people you see talking from those communities about being out and what have you. It must be, and now you're working in this field, it must be incredibly helpful to other people, to younger people perhaps, who are struggling with either the sexuality or with a diagnosis the same as you got, but to see someone who is like them and comes from the same background.
Absolutely. I think growing up, being in a minority from the Asian background, from Muslim background, then identifying as gay, and then identifying as HIV positive, I was almost kind of looking for that role model as somebody who I could look up to or relate to, and it's kind of now come to the point where I want that visibility, so that young people or anyone who is affected by HIV and does come from those minorities can go, actually there is somebody else that relates to it, and I don't have to feel isolated or self-stigmatized because of this, and I can live a good life, good quality life, regardless to my diagnosis or my sexuality or my background.
So tell me about the work that you're doing now, because you left your job to go into this field. field?
Yeah, so I kind of figured out, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do, and then kind of started volunteering with a lot of organisations, HIV charities, and I was quite lucky to be working with, now I'm working with the Terence Higgins Trust, which is a HIV sexual health charity, and I work predominantly with gay men, MSM, that's men who have sex with men, bisexual men, offering them a range of therapeutic programs, some group work, counselling, complementary therapies. So we offer them a range of support services so that they can deal with their diagnosis and live with their diagnosis and have good quality of life.
And again, for those people who were, because you said yourself when you were told you were terrified, you were isolated, you were scared, the whole thing must be a very lonely experience for people.
It is. I mean, sometimes when I have guys come into my newly diagnosed group, I see how scared they are, how fearful they are of the whole idea. It's probably one of the, some of them, it's the first time they've actually shared their diagnosis with anyone. But over the course of the weeks, you do see them really coming out of their shell and really beginning to own that and really understand what the virus means and what it means to live with it, and that you can live a normal, healthy life, and it's not something that we need to kind of just live under or kind of let it overpower us.
And I'm guessing a lot of those people, depending on their backgrounds, don't necessarily have as supportive a network around or as accepting a network around as you do.
Yeah, I'm quite lucky. I think I've kind of been quite proactive to kind of go out there, not in the early stages of my diagnosis, but later on, to kind of get the right support. But I think a lot of people do shut down and do feel really scared. There's almost kind of like a health infrastructure and support infrastructure out there which isn't really accustomed to certain cultures and certain societies. So people who may be from like a Black, Asian, minority ethnic may really struggle with, because they can't really relate to it. They can't really relate to the doctors or the hospital care or the support services. So there is a really big struggle there.
And can I ask you, and again, I've got that vision of those tombstones in my head. Whenever there's a big campaign about anything, it has an impact, and that certainly had one. And I remember talking about a story last year where I think it was STIs in particular in in a certain demographic age group who were sort of 40 plus were going up because people had thought they were okay and they were having unprotected sex again because there weren't a lot of campaigns around it at the time. So then this is not obviously just a question for the gay community, but how much of it now is about unprotected sex?
So it's about knowing what your status is. I think as sexually active, responsible adults, we should be in check of our sexual health, and that's where the problem is. I think when it comes to Black, Asian, minority ethnic groups, they're not always willing to talk about sex or sexuality, so they're not there.
Would the campaigns help again?
I'd hope so. I think there needs to be more campaigns that are targeted towards them. At the moment, there's a lot of campaigns that are targeted to a certain demographic, which reaches those, but it doesn't reach all of the communities.
So when you say that they're not good at talking about sex, those communities, and they're not, perhaps there isn't as many stark campaigns around these days, but does that mean that they're going about having unprotected sex? Potentially,
yeah. I think it's about kind of knowing what your status is. So for instance, when it's HIV, there's now a treatment available like PrEP, pre-exposure prophylaxis, which you can take if you feel that you may be at risk of HIV. I think it's more about educating people and kind of giving them the tools to know that you can be protective if you are having condomless sex, for instance.
Right, okay. And so when you say about their status, it's them knowing what their own
what their own sexual health status is.
It sounds then, it's amazing to have you speak about it, because it sounds like for some communities there's still a long way to go.
Absolutely. I think with the Asian community there, there's 45% of people who access HIV treatment are from those communities, from the Black, Asian, minority ethnic communities, and I think it's really important for those communities to feel empowered by their sexual health. So a lot of people from those communities also get late diagnosed, so it's about educating them to go out and get tested earlier so that they are protecting themselves and others from the virus or any sexually transmitted infection, because there is cuts going on in sexually transmitted sexual health, and it really is needed at this crucial time for those communities.
What would you say to someone who is a young person, perhaps from one of those communities, or any young person who is worried and fearful about all of of this, what would be the first step to take?
If somebody is worried about anything around sexual health, I think the first idea is to go to sexual health clinics, but people may not feel comfortable doing that. So the idea would be to contact, there's a range of support services, even Terence Higgins offer an advice line where you can call. There's community-based organisations which really can reach out as well to those people who may be worried about their sexual health. But there is a lot of support services out there that you can access, not just a gum clinic.
And of course you can access them because again, the fear for a lot of, again, particularly young people is, oh well, if they're not out, someone will find out. It's all done confidentially, of course, isn't it?
Absolutely. All the ones that are support services are confidential. You can be even anonymised when you call like to say the lesbian gay switchboard or Terence Higgins helpline, because people can feel really scared about going to a sexual health clinic, that somebody might see them, so that may not be the most comfortable place for them to access that support, but there is a range available and you don't need to disclose your details and name if you're not comfortable.
Well, Shamal, thank you so much for coming in and talking to us about it.
No worries, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
This is Yasmeen Khan
on BBC Three Counties Radio.